Good evening. I apologize that I'm speaking in English, even though I have been associated with Polish co-fighter combatant for a quarter of a century now, Dr. Niedzwiecki. Why are we here tonight? Why are we as scientists talking about politics? Why are we in Auschwitz? Why did we invite you? It didn't start with politics. It started with a medical understanding, a new medical understanding about a disease that, if it continues, will kill every second person in this room, every second man and woman in Auschwitz, in Poland, in Europe, in the industrialized world. Cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes. This year it is a quarter of a century that I made a discovery that promises to greatly reduce this disease, possibly even makes it largely unknown in future generations. I shared this discovery with a two-time Nobel laureate, Dr. Linus Pauling. He supported it. We were both enthusiastic. We thought we're going to conquer the world with this fantastic message. No more heart attacks, no more strokes. Little did I know that this is going to be an uphill battle. Here we are, 25 years later, we're still fighting for the acknowledgement, for the acceptance, for the implementation of this discovery to the benefit of millions of people. Why is that? We thought everyone is going to embrace us. So my life over the last quarter of a century became like a Sherlock Holmes story in history. Who are the forces that don't want this truth to be known? Who are the forces who deliberately shorten the life of people who die from heart attacks and strokes in the middle of their lives? Who are these interests behind these decisions? We soon found out that there is no coincidence behind this. These are corporate interests that put profits over life. And the more we understood, the more I understood, the more I saw that they are largely at home in my country, in Germany. At the time, the largest export nation of pharmaceutical drugs. And the more I went into history, the more I realized that these companies had a history. And this history led to this town, to the crime scene that is just a few kilometers away from here. So it was now 12 years ago that we first met a survivor of this crime scene, of the concentration camp Auschwitz. His name was August Kowalczyk. We met him at a conference in The Hague. We presented what we knew about IG Farben and how these interests are blocking to this day life-saving information. August spoke too about his experience here in Auschwitz. I will not forget, after the evening was over, he came to me and he said, "For almost 6 decades, I have been asking why. Why was I able to escape the concentration camp? And why did millions of others have to die there?" And tonight, he said, in 2003, I got the answer. Because I needed to meet you guys. Four years later, a group, some of them are still here, of the survivors, gave us what I consider one of the most prestigious awards, the Relay of Life Award, to continue the work. Some of them are still here, and we are honored to have them among us. We already heard about IG Farben. I didn't know about IG Farben from school. I had to become 35 years old before I first heard about IG Farben. There were interests behind this erasure of this name from the history books, behind the reinterpretation what happened here. So my talk in the next half hour will be about connecting our lives as researchers, the battle for the truth about eradicating some of the most deadly diseases of today, with the history of this town, the history of the concentration camp Auschwitz. I gave my talk the title, Liberation of Humanity from Heart Disease. Part 1, understanding the forces that prevented mankind from living with heart disease already today. This is a picture of Charlemagne. It could be any emperor in history. Two symbols of their power. On the one side, the claim to own the world, under whatever pretext. On the other side, the sword, to make sure that this claim becomes reality. We all know that the emperors disappeared, and 90 years ago, they were replaced by a group of people who didn't call themselves emperors. They called themselves gods. This was not a description by third people. This was the description they gave themselves, the title they gave themselves. The Council of Gods. These were the directors of Bayer, BASF, and Höchst, who just had decided that they unite their divine power to rule the world. The real God created nature to be used by us, free of charge. The new gods of IG Farben, they had other ideas. Their plan was to reproduce nature, the molecules of nature, and using a trick. We'll talk about that trick later, called patents. They created a monopoly on these reproduced products. The next step was that they sold these exclusive products to the mortals at a price arbitrarily determined by themselves. Not enough. Then they used their giant profits to finance ruthless organizations, among them the Nazis, to launch a global conquest, also known as World War II, and they supplied them with all war essential materials. Give you two examples how that principle worked. This is a willow tree, everyone knows that. The bark of this tree contains a substance called salicylic acid. This is the molecular structure they found out. Then they modified this structure with a little group here at the side called an acetyl group, and the rest is known to you as aspirin. Acetyl salicylic acid. Copying nature, patenting it, and controlling the world. Take this plant, not so common here, but more in Latin America, the coca plant. They modified the molecule called cocaine and opened the global market with anesthetics. Their claim to world control were patents. They didn't keep those things secret. They published these formulas in the annuals of the German Chemical Society. Each of these books is full with formulas. Some of them the world had seen before, most of them the world had never seen before. Tens of thousands of substances, of course. Before they were published, they were patented by Bayer, Höchst, and BASF. One book? No. Many books. These are the sorcerer's handbooks, the basics of power, of world power, from the 1860s to the beginning of World War I, when most of Europe was agricultural. These guys were playing gods by understanding, analyzing, reproducing, modifying nature. Theoretical knowledge? When we look at the IG Farben handbook, on the products they came out with, we understand that this company owned entire societies. They produced the fertilizers for the farmers. They produced synthetic gasoline for the cars that just came up. They produced synthetic textiles. They produced synthetic rubber, synthetic pesticides, synthetic pharmaceuticals, and. What's the significance of patents? As I said before, it's a trick. Normally, one would say if there's a discovery made that is really beneficial for mankind, we should share it openly. Unless you make sure that there is this trick called patenting. In that case, you are the sole owner of this new molecule. Quite fitting, because you are God. So why should you own this molecule? So the patented nature, and with the help of this legislation, they owned it. So, and with this business model, it was very clear what they needed to do. They needed to make sure that the patent law is accepted in every country in the world. Now, who would voluntarily do that? No one. So it was necessary to convince these other governments, in quotation marks, to accept the same principles. And as I said, they didn't want to do this voluntarily, so there was some other plan necessary. Their marketing song, which was copied by the Nazis, was "Today we own Germany, tomorrow the entire world." And here on this map you see, this is North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia. All these little dots that you see here were subsidiaries of the IG Farben cartel. It was a world octopus. So, and since the other countries didn't want to accept the patent laws voluntarily, the Council of the Gods decided it's time to use this other insignia of power, the sword. We already know that they financed the Nazis' rise to power in Germany as a first step. These were the ruthless guys who would be helping them to achieve their goals. Not only that, they prepared the Nazis for the military conquest of the world. 100% of the synthetic gasoline of the Wehrmacht during World War II was produced by IG Farben. 100% of the synthetic rubber needed to conquer other countries was produced by IG Farben. 100% of the bombs and other explosives used during World War II by the Nazi Wehrmacht were produced by IG Farben. This is not a guess made by me or our team. These are the documents from the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal against 24 managers of IG Farben. And IG Farben delivered the bombs to accomplish this: the destruction of Rotterdam, the conquest of the Netherlands, to accomplish the bombing of Paris, of London, to accomplish the bombing of Stalingrad and conquest of Russia. So one could say, what a bunch of ruthless guys. Destruction was their goal. Destruction was a means to reach the ultimate goal. And this ultimate goal, we heard about it, the goal of the Nazi Farben coalition was to establish a European Reich under their control as a launching pad for the conquest of the world. IG Farben received as war booty all essential industries in the countries occupied by the Nazi Wehrmacht. And this is why the Farben managers were sentenced in Nuremberg for the all-out plundering of European industries. We know this. The advice of I.G. Farben to the German government how the future of Europe should look. Also a document from Nuremberg. The title of this document is not Great Plan. It starts with the position of the German patent law in a European economic sphere under German leadership. Does that ring a bell to you? Another picture from their product book. Fascinating. It shows you the Lego principle of these guys, building little things to control the world. From limestone, from coal, and from water. These are the three substances here. Kalk, Kohle, Wasser in German. They create this fascinating tree. And like a Lego tree, there are acetyl synthetics, vinyl synthetics, synthetic rubber, synthetic fabrics, photographic films, paints, varnishes, synthetic oils, styrol synthetics, etc. Fantastic. Why am I showing you this picture? I want you to remember these three words, lime, coal, and water, when we go to the next picture. On April 7, 1941, the I.G. Farben gods decided to come to Auschwitz. This is the founding document of I.G. Auschwitz. Gründung der IG Auschwitz. April 7, 1941. And what do we read? I'm going to read in German and then I translate it. Darin liegt der entscheidende Grund, dass das schlesische Buna-Werk nicht wie ursprünglich geplant in Breslau, in Wrocław, sondern in unmittelbarer Nachbarschaft zur schlesischen Kohle errichtet wird. In other words, the Silesian coal fields, coal mines right here, was the reason why I.G. Farben chose Auschwitz as the site of their I.G. Auschwitz plant, right here in Monowitz, and why it wasn't established in Wrocław. Coal, water, Vistula River. This is how it looked. The industrial plant of Monowitz, just about a kilometer from here. And of course, with 8 kilometers in length and 3 kilometers in width, it was a tremendous challenge to build this plant. So they needed slave labor. April 41, the decision to go to Auschwitz. In October 41, the Camp 1 was already too small and they needed a large camp called now Birkenau. And of course the Nazis, they piggybacked on this death machinery and they said, oh, great, there's a death machinery, a gas chamber, there's a industrialized extermination camp. So let's bring our racial aspects in this too. And we all know Wannsee conference followed about 10 months after this decision was taken because the machinery was there for mass killing. the IG Farben gods also perfected one of the most unethical businesses of all time, the pharmaceutical investment business with disease. You can approach any disease in two principal ways. Either you try to understand them at the cellular level and find ways to prevent or to correct them, or you ignore all that and you just pretend to the patient that he or she recovers by masking the symptoms. If you are in the business of producing pharmaceuticals, the last thing you want is that a disease disappears, because then your market is gone. So if you are designing an industry that actually defines diseases as markets by law, in order to save this industry, you cannot go to correct the cause at the cellular level. You have to mask the symptoms of disease. And therefore, about 80% of all pharmaceutical drugs that are on the market in Poland today, in the world today, are merely covering symptoms. And this is why we don't know much about the cellular level, how diseases are generated. The advantage of investing in the masking of symptoms is tremendous. First of all, diseases continue as markets. Your market remains. Actually, it expands, because these synthetic drugs, they keep this disease going. And even better, the side effects, the known side effects of synthetic drugs, which are for the body are toxins, they cause new diseases. More than 40% of the drugs currently prescribed to people in the industrialized world, including Poland, are potentially cancerogenic, causing cancers. What a fantastic business model. We are frequently asked, Dr. Rath, Dr. Netsvicki, what you are saying is that there's an industry among us that doesn't care about the life of millions of people. We can't believe this. You're making this up. This is conspiracy theory. What do we say? Well, my friend, you need to think twice. They've done it before. This is Fritz Termer, director of Bayer, the largest pharmaceutical company at that time, convicted in Nuremberg on July 29, 1948. We already heard it. For the most severe war crimes there are. And where were they committed? Right here. Fritz Termer was the highest ranking corporate official responsible for what happened here. Imagine how many billions must these corporations have paid over the past 7 decades to hide their criminal past, to keep what you hear tonight out of the textbooks of history. We're entering part 2 of my lecture, the battle for the right of mankind to live without heart disease, taking place right now. Cardiovascular disease, heart attacks and strokes, is the single largest epidemic of our time. It's paradise for the pharmaceutical investment business. The last thing they need is that anyone comes along and says, we can reduce this market. So they don't care that some of the most intriguing questions cannot be answered by their business models. They tell us that high levels of cholesterol are damaging the artery walls, thereby causing the plaques, the deposits that cause the infarctions in the heart and the stroke. Now, cholesterol in the body of a human being is the same in every artery, whether it's the coronary artery or the artery of the liver or the spleen or the brain. It's the same level in the arteries and veins. So why in the world do we get heart attacks and not nose attacks? Or ear attacks or kneecap attacks? Why in the world do we get atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, but not venosclerosis, if the cholesterol levels are the same? So something is fundamentally wrong. In other words, it's a lie that cholesterol is the initial step of cardiovascular disease. It's just a hoax. It's a marketing hoax by the industry that wants to sell cholesterol-lowering agents. And that's the reason why they're telling you that hoax. That is a curve that signalizes the rise of one drug category only, statins, cholesterol-lowering statins from 1990 to 2010. Almost $40 billion each year in global sales from a drug that is built on a hoax. And because it's a hoax, the epidemic continues. If these drugs would work, would actually go to the root cause of the disease, we would get rid of this disease. This is not the case. So in 1992, I made a discovery that casts a new light on the cellular origin of cardiovascular disease. What is the real cause why these deposits develop that ultimately clog the arteries? And when I shared it with two-time Nobel laureate Linus Pauling, he said, well, this is one of the greatest discoveries in the second half of the 20th century. And in his last call that he published before his death, he and I wrote the conclusion. This is his own handwriting. The goal is now in sight, the abolition of heart disease as the cause of disability and mortality for the present generation and future generations. Well, this was a declaration of war for these interests that had defined this disease as a multi-billion-dollar market. And here is, in summary, the discovery. There are two ways to stabilize the artery walls and keep it healthy. The first one is you have enough collagen. These are the reinforcement molecules that keep the artery wall stable and prevent the deposits. The single most important molecule that is needed to produce collagen is vitamin C. Most animals, your dogs, your cats, most mammals produce high amounts of vitamin C and have high amounts of collagen. And therefore, cardiovascular disease in the animal world is essentially the exception. We humans cannot produce vitamin C in our bodies because we lost it during evolution. Frequently get too little vitamins in the diet. What happens is we produce too few reinforcement molecules. And in our artery walls, cracks and crevices develop. And it becomes necessary that repair factors in our blood enter the wall with the goal to do what? To repair it. And suddenly we understand that there is a reason why these plaques develop, why these deposits develop. It is initially something good that wants to mend a weak artery wall. Only if the vitamin deficiency continues over many years, over decades, then this repair process overshoots and the plaques develop. The old concept of cardiovascular disease says, well, cholesterol is bad. If you are unlucky, you have high cholesterol levels and you get cardiovascular disease because some major force in heavens or in hell is dooming you. The new concept says it all makes sense. Your artery walls are too weak and repair becomes necessary. So once you know this, you can initiate the repair process that is normal, which is giving enough vitamins in the diet, producing enough collagen, avoiding the development of deposits, preventing heart attacks and strokes. It's a regulatory principle of nature we need to understand, and that will lead the way to the reduction of disease. Theory, no. 19 years ago, we already documented that micronutrients help to prevent the further development of atherosclerotic deposits, and in some cases can make them even disappear. This is a human heart taken with a computed tomograph, and this is the calcium deposit in the left coronary artery because you look inside the body from below. This is before the micronutrient program. This is 1 year later, the same patient, the same heart, the same left coronary artery. The deposits have disappeared. In the meantime, we know that this is not one study. In 2013, a study was published summarizing 247,000 participants. High vitamin C blood level resulted in 38% reduction in the risk for stroke. An analysis of 293,000 participants over 10 years showed that 700 milligrams of vitamin C per day resulted in 25% decrease of cardiovascular disease risk. Considering the fact that 17 million people are dying each year from cardiovascular disease worldwide, the simple measure of this alone would save 4 million lives each year. With this discovery, with this understanding, cardiovascular disease has become so easy to understand that a school child in primary school can understand it. This is a normal artery wall. You look inside its cross-section. When cardiovascular disease begins with low vitamins in the diet, little cracks and crevices develop between the cells, and the mending, the repair molecules, they enter the wall and are deposited there. When this process continues and overshoots, the bulge, the deposits develop that eventually clog the arteries. And now comes the most interesting aspect. As we've shown in this clinical study that I just shown to you, this process is reversible. In other words, if you stabilize the artery wall, if enough collagen is being produced, these deposits, these repair molecules that are inside the wall are released, thereby reversing this process. There's no guarantee for this, but we've shown it that it happens. And we suddenly can now solve all those open questions that I raised at the beginning. Why we get infarctions of the heart and not of the nose, why we get atherosclerosis and not venous sclerosis. We get infarctions of the heart and not the nose because the heart is the only organ in the body that constantly pumps. So the mechanical stress of the pumping heart exposes the underlying weakness of the coronary arteries. We understand why we get deposits in the arteries, because the blood pressure in the arteries is about 100 times higher than in the veins. So it exposes, the high blood pressure exposes the underlying weakness of arteries as opposed to veins. And of course, we now understand why animals don't get heart attacks, because they produce high amounts of vitamin C in their own bodies, which we can't. None of these questions can be solved by the cholesterol theory. None of them. And this year, thanks to our fantastic research team under Dr. Netswicki's guidance, we were able to ultimately confirm this new understanding. We created an animal model, an artificial model, an animal that does not produce vitamin C, just like we humans. And they genetically inserted one of the repair factors. And they studied, does this repair factor enter the artery wall of these animals when the plaques develop? And here's the result. You look inside the artery wall of one of these animals, and on the right-hand side, let's start with this, you see a normal wall. The white area is where normally the blood flows. The lining here, the collagen lining, is intact. No cracks, no crevices. Now, if you put these animals on a low vitamin diet, you see that these linings are broken. And where they are broken, plaques develop. Exactly like in the human system. And when we analyze these plaques, we'll find these repair factors accumulating inside. This is a genetically modified animal model. The highest level of scientific proof there is, higher than any clinical study, because you outlaw any variables except the ones you study. So there's no possibility to scientifically dispute these results. We know from scurvy among sailors, they died within 4 months from hemorrhagic blood loss because, as we already know, no vitamin C produced in the body. On the ship, the sauerkraut was gone after 4 months, and they died from arteries breaking open. First, bleeding of the gums, then internal bleeding. Now, if we go back to the history of humans, to our ancestors, a few thousand generations ago, Europe was under a thick ice layer. We call this the Ice Ages, lasting between 20,000 to 80,000 years. So for thousands of generations, our ancestors grew up in harsh climatic conditions, with the number one problem is, where do I get enough food, and above all, enough plant food rich of vitamins? Of course, they didn't know about vitamins, so they died. They died from scurvy, like flies, unless they inherited repair factors. And this is why these repair factors that we look at today are human-specific, because they were life-saving. A child that had this repair factor didn't die, because at times of vitamin deficiency, repair factor was mending the arteries. The child could grow up, have children on its own. The repair factor was passed on to the next generation. And suddenly we find ourselves as a species in which 50% of the members of this species, meaning you and millions of others, are at risk for cardiovascular disease, a health condition that is essentially unknown in the rest of the animal or mammal world. Understanding scurvy as the biggest threat to the survival of the human race in the past is the key to the eradication of cardiovascular disease in the future. And it's not just cardiovascular disease. Once we understand now how diseases are originating at the level of cells, we understand the role of micronutrients, we induce this. We are going to the root cause of the disease. We are correcting the deficiency at the root cause, many cases, micronutrient deficiency, and we are reducing these diseases for this and future generations. And of course, once diseases are reduced, then the business with disease becomes redundant too. And because the market is so giant, we were faced with one of the largest oppositions of all time, certainly the largest one in the history of medicine. Over the last 12 years, over the last 22 years, we were faced with more than 100 lawsuits brought against this medical breakthrough by the lobbyists of the pharmaceutical business with disease. When you go to the internet, you read about our work, you think, what are these people doing? So defamation, distortion is another tool of the pharmaceutical lobbyists to prevent that the truth is prevailing. So you may ask the question, why are we here today? With 100 lawsuits, you normally drown. That's the reason. If you have any questions whether you should believe us or not, the fact that we are here today should give you the answer. So the court bans, they failed. The discrediting has failed too. So the only thing they can do, the only weapon that is left in the hands of the status quo, wanting to protect their giant markets, is this: corporate dictatorships. We heard about the Brussels EU, but right now, some of you may wonder, what is this transatlantic agreement about that they are talking? Well, it's all about the same. Establishing a global network of corporate dictatorships under the pretext of free trade and harmonization of trade standards. In other words, you're not allowed to put more than 500 milligrams of vitamin C in a pill. Some of the micronutrients that are life-saving for millions of people are completely banned. Not because they are dangerous for human health, but they are dangerous for the investment business with disease. We tonight, the people of this planet, we stand at a crossroad. We can choose a world shackled or a world liberated from disease. If we choose the second, we need to do something. We heard about the movement of life, and Dr. Nitzwicki in the next presentation will go into more details. Movement of life means taking advantage of scientific breakthroughs in natural health. If you want to know more about anything you've heard so far on health, go to our Research Institute website. There you'll find many more aspects and a lot of information substantiating those statements. Movement of life means taking action to liberate mankind from today's most common diseases. Movement of life means promoting sustainable solutions that help improve the life of millions in rich and poor countries. Plant a citrus tree. If heart attacks and strokes are primarily caused by too little vitamins in our diet, the first thing every child in kindergarten should learn is how to plant a little citrus tree. Or for that matter, if the citrus tree doesn't grow because it's too cold, take an apple tree. Contains vitamin C, a little bit less than citrus. Do you understand the power of this message? Liberate ourselves from the dependency of drugs. And it's not about vitamin pills. It's about knowing. Health, medicine comes to your garden, comes to the farms. You remember this map from IG Farben, how it controls the world and how it claims the entire world? Well, what about this? With the help of the internet, with the help of an organized campaign, spreading this word, eradicating heart disease by planting citrus trees around the world, saving millions of lives and billions in healthcare costs. The movement of life is about creating effective and sustainable local projects that gradually replace global monopolies and terminate the economic and political dependency associated with them. Movement of life is the battle of mankind for the right to live without preventable diseases, for the right of mankind to decrease economic dependencies in the industrialized world and above all in the developing world. And it's the battle of mankind for protecting democracy against corporate dictatorship. Thank you for your attendance.